Good morning or afternoon. Welcome to FSMA Fridays, hosted by Safety Chain and the Acheson Group. Delighted to be hosting our July summer session here. We're going to get some FSMA updates, but also focusing this discussion on the top risks around environmental monitoring and controls. As always, delighted to have many people with us today. My name is Jill Bender, VP of Marketing at Safety Chain. A few housekeeping tips. We will be recording this session, and you will all receive a link automatically in the next few days. As always, we want this to be interactive as possible. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in. We'll do our best to get to as many as possible. We already had one that came in our FSMA Fridays LinkedIn group that we will be addressing. As always, for privacy, you only should see myself and Dr. David Acheson, who's on with us today, but delighted as always to see the crowd forming. And with that, we shall get going. So welcome and good morning, Dr. Acheson. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Doing well. Hope you're well all, and thanks for joining us again.
Absolutely. Well, share with us. Did we have a busy month, FSMA-wise? What's going on?
Well, not a lot new coming out on latest on FSMA. I think as a general comment to everybody who joins us, what we'd be very interested in is learning on some of your experiences of what you're getting from FSMA. I will share a story which I think illustrates some of the challenges. We have talked about preventive controls a lot on this call over the last couple of years, and one of the things that I'm sure you will all remember is that when you have determined that there is a risk in your processing environment that requires a preventive control, you have to determine what that is, you have to validate it, and you have to monitor it. And to me, the language in the regulation is pretty specific about the monitoring needs to be determined by you as to what is effective in terms of controlling the risk, and it's pretty general. Well, the story goes here that there was a very large manufacturer who we work with who had an FDA inspector come in, and they were making a baked product, and they got written up because they were not doing continuous monitoring. And they called us and they called me, and we said, no, you don't need to according to the regulation. You set your monitoring parameters to ensure that you've controlled the risk. And they got into a tussle with the inspectors over the inspector's expectation that they did continuous monitoring, which they felt they didn't need to do. Point of the story is that we will get more and more and more of these where the FDA inspectors believe or are interpreting the regulations one way, and those of us on the private side are interpreting them a different way. I happen to believe pretty strongly that we were right and the inspector was wrong. But as we all know, when you're in that FDA inspection environment, it's very difficult to suggest that I'm right and you're wrong to the inspector, and you just have to kind of like roll with it. Not exactly a FSMA update, but yet it is, I think, very relevant to the challenges that we're facing. And going forward with FSMA Fridays as we roll into produce rule and other rules that will be eventually kicking in, like the intentional contamination rule, which presents its own set of challenges, we'd be very interested to hear what you're facing. What are you learning? What are you seeing? So we can share experiences. So back to you, Jill. A little bit on latest updates, but a bit of a sales pitch and push on where we could make these FSMA Fridays most helpful to everybody.
No, absolutely. I think that's interesting, and to your point, and you predicted this, that the interpretation is going to be the proof, you know, of how well this is working and how well everyone's interpreting correctly or their own interpretation. So it's interesting, and I absolutely encourage folks to share. And if you want to post on FSMA Fridays LinkedIn group, you know, for discussion points, great. If you prefer to stay anonymous, we're happy to email us at Safety Chain, and we'll post your little things that you've had to share anonymously. So good. No, let's dive in then. This month's discussion, which of course is very timely with everything going on, or for the top risks regards to environmental monitoring and controls. So let's dive in, and David, why don't you share with us, what is FDA's current major focus?
Yeah, well, as we were to, just as a general background comment, Jill, and thanks, as we were discussing what would be a useful topic for FSMA Friday this week, I wanted to circle back and go back over some of the challenges with the environmental monitoring and environmental control programs. And there's no question that this continues to be a major focus of the regulators, especially on the FDA side. The swabathons are continuing. It is undoubtedly a huge issue. We are seeing, as I think probably most people on this call are well aware, we're seeing repeated recalls in different situations with ready-to-eat products that are in which the agency has determined that they have been manufactured, processed in an unsanitary environment. And that determination is based on environmental monitoring data that the FDA has. And so I think this is an area that requires focus for two or three very, very specific reasons. The first is, yeah, as we all know, there is now a regulatory requirement to have an environmental monitoring program, and you've got to make sure that you have got all your boxes checked on that one. Secondly, there is very clearly a risk in terms of a recall. And with this environmental monitoring going on and the connection through whole genome sequencing, which we'll probably talk about in a second, it's ramped stuff up. And that's not just regulatory risk. This is real, true operational risk and the chances of a recall. And then the third area is obviously the reputational side of this, when you have a recall and managing that. So while we've got new regulatory requirements in this space, this, in my view, is of all the areas that FDA is focused on, is huge. I'm sort of, with the companies that we're working with, this is the area that I'm most nervous about. It's the areas where many of our clients are most nervous about, is what do we need to do? How do we stay out in front? How thorough do we have to be, and what will happen if we have a problem? So it isn't the only focus of the regulators by any means, but to me it is a huge one and continues to be a huge one. And it's really important that we pay attention to this from both a FSMA perspective as well as just making sure we do this right so that we don't get tangled up in a recall. So that's my thinking on that one, Jill.
No, interesting. Well, it really goes to the impact around that. So if you were to take it then a step further, what are the actual FSMA requirements for environmental monitoring?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I've just been talking a little bit about FSMA as a component, but let's sort of revisit that. And just to remind everybody, and I would suspect that most people on this call could probably recite them back to me just as well as I can recite them back to all our colleagues. I hope. Anyway, the point to remember here is that if you are making a ready-to-eat food, and it is exposed to your manufacturing or processing environment. And by that, my interpretation of that is that if it's coming out of some sort of a process, so let's assume it's a cooking process or a steaming process or something, or a pasteurization process, and it is exposed. And that means that it has not been cooked in a bag or a can or a bottle or anything. It's exposed to the environment, even if only briefly. Then it falls into this category of exposed. At that point, I think it's very critical that the manufacturers do a risk assessment and say, all right, it's coming out red hot, it's really hot, we're doing a hot fill, it's going right into a container within seconds. Yes, it's exposed, but the risk is really, really small. Take that into account. I think that's a factor that can help you. If, on the other hand, it's coming out of a, quote, a cooking environment and it's then moving down the conveyor belt and is very obviously exposed, then that's kind of obvious before it goes in its final packaging. So the key points to think about is question one, is my product exposed? If it is, then ask yourself whether you've got a risk from a contamination in the environment, and the FDA is focused on Listeria monocytogenes and Salmonella very clearly. So those are the two bugs they're focused on in most situations. If then your food is going into a package and does not either receive a further kill step, which means it's cooked, pasteurized, steamed, whatever. If it's not, then you need to have an environmental monitoring program. The other criteria which will get you out of needing to do this is if that food is formulated in some way in which if there has been a contamination while it was exposed, then the formulation would effectively take care of the pathogen. So simple points is question 1, is my food exposed? Question 2, is there a risk associated with that which would trigger the need for an environmental monitoring program? And my view of that is unless it's a very, very short gap with hot product, there is a risk which you need a monitoring program. And then third question is, well, yeah, it's exposed, but it's going back into a package, and then I'm going to cook it, pasteurize it, cook in bag, whatever, which means you don't need it. So those are the key questions to ask around that. And, you know, just keeping in mind that if you are having to put in place a monitoring program based on FSMA, there are a number of details in the rule around which labs you're using, what assays you're using, documenting your sites, documenting your corrective actions. We've talked about those before, that are important to make sure that you've got all those boxes checked in your food safety plan and your monitoring records. So that, Jill, is essentially the essence of the requirements, just to repeat.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think in providing that very succinct, the 2 steps, because I know we've had just long discussions just on that. So it was a good sort of reiteration. It goes back to that, you know, if it's not documented, it's not done, right, in the eyes of the inspector.
Right, exactly. Right.
So I guess then, you know, following up, and you talked about the 2 sort of risks, one being the Listeria is one of the main ones. So should folks be looking for Listeria monocytogenes in the plant?
Yeah, well, I just said a few seconds ago that what FDA wants to make sure is that you're controlling Salmonella and you're controlling Listeria monocytogenes. They are clearly the 2 environmental contaminants that the FDA is focused on with their swabathons, and is what's going to get us in trouble. It's a very, I think it's a very key question. Many assays that are available and many food companies and many labs will stop at Listeria species. They'll take swabs and they will test for Listeria species. My view is that is perfectly okay for the most part. And like everything else with FSMA and food safety, it's always the ultimate answer is, well, it depends. And, you know, if I was going to be truly facetious and obnoxious, I think the answer to my question on this one, Jill, would have been, well, it depends, and let everybody figure it out. But let's try to be helpful. Let's talk about what it depends on. Let's assume we've got a scenario where you've got your routine environmental monitoring program, you're finding Listeria species, and you react to it appropriately. So you vector, you clean and sanitize, you make sure product is protected. If necessary, you do a root cause analysis, you document it all, and you retest. And it's like, yeah, we're good, we've cleaned it up. You know, the next 2, 4, 6 tests are all negative, and it remains negative. That's fine. Different scenario where we start to see an increased frequency of Listeria in our plant. We might be getting 1 positive a month. All of a sudden, we're starting to see 3 and 4 positives a month in different places. This is where it starts to get gray, because you're going to have to ask yourself, is this a resident strain? Do I have something that's changed in my environmental process control, in my manufacturing systems, in the equipment? Have I got a harborage problem? And if you do, you're going to need to really determine whether that's the case and take the appropriate action. If the FDA comes in, which they can do, and look at your records as part of a routine inspection for environmental monitoring, and they say, well, you know, you've been chugging along at 1 positive in zone 3 a month, good job, you're finding it, you're remediating it, that's exactly what you want to do. But in the last 6 months, you've had 5 and 6 positives. What's going on? What's changed? I don't think the FDA is expecting you to have looked for Listeria monocytogenes necessarily, but you need to be absolutely sure that that's not what's causing the problem. And that gets to the case by case where you may say, well, we really want to know if this is LM. Because this then gets into the, I think, the challenge between where food safety and quality assurance sometimes has to have some tough conversations with operations. And you may need to go to operations and say, look, we've had this increased level. We've shown that it's a Listeria monocytogenes, which obviously can cause illness. It's what the FDA is focused on. It could trigger a recall. And we need to shut this line down for 2 days and do a complete tear apart, clean up, and solve the problem. So there isn't a black and white yes-no answer to should you be looking for Listeria mono. To recap, my view is Listeria species works really well, and it's a great way to go, but every now and again, if you start to see changes and you start to see things popping up that you are concerned about as a food safety professional, ask yourself, do I need to know if this is L mono, because I may need to take a more significant action in my plant to solve the problem. So hopefully that's provided a little insight. You know, without being overtly pushing tags services, these are the kinds of situations where we're very willing and happy to engage with a food company and help you figure it out, because there really isn't a right and wrong answer. And as I said a few minutes ago, we want to stay on the right side of our risks. We don't want to recall, we don't want to damage our reputation, and we absolutely want to make sure that we're following the FSMA requirements. So, good question, but without a really clear answer. But it's hopefully that discussion has provided a bit of insight. So back to you, Jill.
No, thanks, David. I mean, it sounds as you always preach, sort of the best practices of monitoring trends and then discerning what's causing those trends holds true to what you were just talking about. So it seems to make sense to me, but I'm sure to the audience as well. So let's go into another topic here, which I know is near and dear to your heart. Should you be using genetic tools such as whole genome sequencing?
Yeah. No, this is one that I've talked about. And for those of you who track and follow our newsletters, you'll know that we've just written about this. This is a real tough question. I think if we were to look at this objectively as food safety professionals, and cost aside, if we were to say, would we like to know in more detail what organisms are lurking in our environment? Okay, I'm going back to our previous conversation. I'm finding Listeria once a month. And you as a food safety professional are probably saying, you know, I'd really like to know whether it's Listeria monocytogenes. And I'd really like to know if it is LM, is it the same strain that's popping up repeatedly? Because that would, if it's true, then that would indicate a different problem I need to solve. So from a purely professional perspective, I'm sure many of us say, yeah, I'd really like to know that. But what stops us from doing that? What stops us asking that question? And it's pretty simple. It's fear of regulatory action. And we've sort of heading to a situation in the United States where fear of regulatory action is actually impeding good food safety practices. And I could get on a whole soapbox about that. But to me, that's the reality with whole genome sequencing. It is a technology which has advanced hugely. It's relatively inexpensive to do. It can give you really valuable information. But why aren't food companies embracing it and doing it a whole lot more? And I think the answer is pretty simple, is, well, if we do that and we start to find matching strains, are we vulnerable if the FDA comes in and wants to see our data? Are they going to say, well, you found this same strain in 2016, you've just found it again in 2017, your whole program is bad, your cleaning and sanitation's failing, we're going to say you've manufactured product in those, over that 12-month period in insanitary conditions, and what are you going to do about it? Because we think you should recall the product. Obviously, I'm playing out a scenario there, Jill, but we've hit a challenge, which is why it is one of my pet peeves. We've hit a challenge where technology and an ability to produce safe food and to be preventive, which is what it's all about, has now exceeded, in my view, the regulator's capacity to handle the data. And we're starting to get into a situation where we're not using the best technology and the best tools for fear of regulatory action. And that is that's backwards. It's not the way we should be. Okay, let me get off my soapbox and try to answer this in a practical way. Should you use whole genome sequencing? And I come back to this question of, if something's changing in your environment and you are finding more salmonellas or more listerias popping up than usual, what you really need to know is, do you have a resident strain? Do you have the same strain that's hanging around that you're not getting rid of? Why is that important? I think everybody on the call knows it's important, because if the FDA figure out you've got a resident strain as opposed to a transient strain, and there I'm defining that yeah, you find salmonellas and listerias in your environment, but they're all different. We've got to tighten that up. We've got to stop people bringing it in on their boots, but it doesn't mean we've got a strain that's stuck in a wall or a crack or a piece of equipment or a roller or something that keeps popping out and creating risk. If you've got the resident strain, FDA takes a very, very dim view of that, as we've seen repeatedly with recalls. So if you think you need to use whole genome sequencing to answer that question, do I have a resident strain, then do it. Use it. If you think you might have a resident strain and you haven't used whole genome sequencing or PFGE or some other technology, and an FDA comes in and there's ultimately a problem, particularly if anybody gets sick, then you're lining yourself up for some serious conversations with the regulators. And that's the kind of stuff that unfortunately ultimately leads to Department of Justice weighing in as well, because they'll say, well, you could have done more, you should have done more, you didn't investigate and solve this problem adequately, people have got sick, and you should have done more. So my answer to this one is, unfortunately, the regulatory environment is impeding us using these latest tools on a regular basis. But in my view, there are absolutely times when you do need to do this in order to fully protect yourself from regulatory action and from making people sick, frankly. So it's a complex question, Jill, and obviously as you and everybody on the call realizes, I'm pretty emotional about this one because I feel like we're shooting ourselves in the foot, and that's not where we need to be. So back to you.
Okay, I'm having a hard time responding to that because I think it's, I mean, as you said, and I know why you're passionate about this, it goes back to good practices. It's a shame that's sort of under the umbrella in what you're talking about it. No, thank you for that. Well, and I think you sort of mentioned this, but we'll just follow it up there with, what will the FDA do if you're not using modern genetic tools?
Yeah, absolutely, Jill. I think I really did answer this. And I don't think the FDA will do anything if you're not using them on a routine basis. But if a situation develops like the one that I've just described, and you're not doing everything that you could do, you'll get in trouble. And that's the bottom line. So it's another one of it depends kinds of answers, but it does depend. And and again, if you're finding some challenges and you're wondering what to do, there isn't a clear right and a wrong. It is an experience type answer. It's based on many, many factors. But keep them in mind as these are good tools, and there are times when you do need to use them. And there are times, I think, when FDA is going to expect you to have done everything you possibly could, which would include some of these genetic tools. I will add, if I may, Jill, just a comment there, is when I was at IAFP, and I'm sure many of our colleagues on the call were there, there are some new technologies that are beginning to come out from some of the diagnostic companies that will allow us to not use whole genome sequencing, but using genetic technology, make a determination whether you've got similar strains or even same strains in the facilities. This doesn't then create discoverable data like sequence data. It's a higher level. So I think maybe the technology industry will solve this for us. They're not there yet as far as I know. And if any of our colleagues on the call know of tools that will do this really well and essentially effectively manage the risk in the way whole genome sequencing will, then please share. This is all about learning. So back to you, Jill.
Yeah, I think it's interesting with those diagnostic tools if that ends up being more of an interim step to decipher if you need to go to the next step. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Well, I'll have to share a comment that just came in from one of our audiences saying, wow, what a double-edged sword, the thing of genome sequencing. So very, very astute way of saying what we just went through. So thank you for that expression there. Okay, well, I knew that this conversation would be lively, and we've already gotten quite a few questions that have come in. So in the short 5 minutes or so that we have left, I might do a little bit of rapid fire, if you don't mind, and seeing, which ones we can get to. And certainly for which ones we can't, we'll do our best to post a few on our LinkedIn FSMA Fridays page. So with that, let me just throw a few. There was one, actually, it was a good comment, and thank you for this. One person mentioned, I had an FDA visit this week, food distribution operation. It was a quick routine observational visit. They had not visited since 2009. However, he made it clear that this visit was not being audited to FSMA standards yet, and he commented that the next visit would be. So I think that's a really good antidote as far as someone that's just dealt with an FDA visit. And then there was a follow-up question to that saying, your experience is an EMP program necessary in a distribution center? And that might be a larger question, but I don't know if you want to take a stab at that one.
It's a great question, actually, and what I'm hearing there, and I apologize that line isn't perfect today, but what I'm hearing there is an EMP necessary in a distribution center? And of course, everybody knows what I'm going to say is, well, it depends. And but my general answer to that is no. I don't believe it is, unless you are doing things in there that are going to create a risk. A regular distribution center where we've got pallets of goods coming in, we've got pallets of goods going out. Obviously there's picking going on, there's sorting going on, but it's boxes of this and boxes of that, some of which may be exposed to the environment. Boxes of fresh fruits, vegetables, leafy greens, tomatoes, you name it. I do not believe that you need an environmental monitoring program in there. Now, if you are handling product a lot, especially if you're trimming it, if you're doing things which could be construed as sort of processing perhaps, then that's different. My default is no, because putting an environmental monitoring program into a DC would be very costly, very complex, very cumbersome. Likely you're going to find stuff in there, and what do you do about it? And is it really creating a risk? And with the distribution centers that we've worked with, my advice is no, unless you're doing something unusual, don't do that. Now, as with everything FSMA, we will learn. If the FDA starts inspecting DCs and saying, why don't you have an environmental monitoring program, we're going to write you up 483, we're going to issue warning letters, we've got to revisit it. and maybe talk to the FDA about, okay, where are you going here? But I'm not aware of any outbreaks or any situations that have arisen as a direct result of contamination of ready-to-eat food in a DC. It may have happened, it probably has happened, but it's certainly not one of those high-level risks. So my default right now is no. If I was had to land one way or the other, unless you're doing something, as I said, that's a bit different and a bit unusual, then no.
Okay, great. And I know you're going with some assumptions there, but I know that answer is appreciated. If we have time, I'll just throw a few more at you. That's okay. This one's a little bit longer, but I think it's a good one, and it came through on our LinkedIn FSMA Fridays group. So I'll read it slowly. As a food ingredient distributor, we source from at least 3 companies that I know that are registered API manufacturers. How do the regulations governing food apply to registered pharma companies making products used for food ingredients? This person has not been able to find any exemptions to HARPC, such as granted to infant formula, seafood, or juice companies. However, one of the companies they're sourcing from is particularly difficult to get anything out of, and just send us a reply that they're trying to set up a basic supply chain information. So the question is, since the FDA is going to be doing inspections by investigators and specializing in a particular industry, would an API manufacturer ever see a FSMA-type food inspection?
Yeah, that is a really good question, and it's not one that I've come across before. The rules make it pretty clear if you are a registered facility for foods, then you need to look at whether or not you should comply. And there are obviously the exceptions that we know of with juice and seafood and so on. This particular question has got manufacturers who are making an ingredient. They obviously are not registered as a food company. They're registered as pharma. And what should they do? I'm guessing that they've made the decision that they don't need to register. My recommendation on this one is look at those ingredients yourself, do a risk analysis on them, and make a determination whether there is a risk that needs to be controlled by the supplier. So if you're using this ingredient, and supposing it's a chemical ingredient of some type that is really doesn't have any microbiological risks, it maybe has got some physical risks, although if it's coming out of a pharma level facility, likely that's very, very tightly controlled already. So my recommendation is do a hazard analysis yourself so that you're covered. And if you determine there's a risk that the supplier should be controlling for food safety, then have a word with the supplier and just make sure that they are controlling that risk, and then document that you've done all of that. This is another one of those situations where we could go crazy. We could be creating work for ourselves, and my view is protect yourself, document what you've done, and then when the FDA comes and looks at all of that, they're going to be able to tell us, yeah, that's good enough, or no, we need to do something more significant, in which case they will go to the pharma company and say, well, you may be a pharmaceutical that's registered, but you also need to register as a food company. That would be my answer to that one right out of the gate, Jill. The other thing you can do is pose this question directly to FDA. They've got their online technical answers, and I'd recommend you do that. Let's see what they say directly, but that's my interpretation.
And I would encourage the person, if you do that, let's share back what answer you got, right? Yeah, I think that's interesting. So with that, there were definitely a few more that came in, a few bit more granular. What I'm going to suggest we try to do here in the interest of time is we'll post these and the more simple answers, if they are, on our FSMA Fridays LinkedIn group. And then if there's a few that we could bring into the next month's discussion, we'll do that. So for those who are online with us, if you haven't joined the FSMA Fridays LinkedIn group, please do, and we'll do our best to start posting more questions. And then certainly, as we talked about, hopefully you'll start sharing more discussions around FDA visits and so forth. And thank you again to the one person that did do that. So with that, I'm going to do just a quick little commercial, as I would be remiss not to. Obviously, I don't need to for the Acheson group. David, thank you so much. Your ongoing expertise to this group is so imperative. Over the years, I know everyone has appreciated it, and certainly TAG is a great resource to help you to find gaps, build your plans, and even deal with these many questions that we've addressed today. And then certainly with Safety Chain, while we're not a diagnostic tool that Dave brought up today, we certainly do help in making sure that your programs are being executed with automation software, as well as provide the data intelligence you really need to identify when you do have trends and be able to discern what's happening and manage those for improvement. We do have some things coming up, couple great content pieces from TAG. If you have not registered for the newsletter, I highly encourage you to. Those newsletters make their way around Safety Chain offices regularly. Some great information there. We'll be sending out a link to one of the latest posts in the post session here. Safety Chain has a few new things. Our business intelligence tool, Safety Chain Analytics, new video out for that. And as always, we look forward to seeing everyone at upcoming events, SQF Info Days, Alchemy's User Conference, and quite a few more in the fall season. So with that, thank you for everyone for joining us for FSMA Fridays. Thank you, David, for taking on the challenge of answering as many questions, and we'll look forward to syncing up next month.
Very good. Well, thank you, Jill. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.